said the bride vanished on her wedding night, but I saw her in the woods whispering my name. And the man she was marrying, he looks exactly like the one I see in my dreams, only he died 100 years ago. Alara, you came back to me. Now every time the moonlight touches her skin, Alara remembers something that never happened, yet feels too real to deny. A love too deep to forget, a tragedy too dark to rest. And as midnight draws near, the veil thins, the whispers grow louder, and the man from the past waits, not to haunt her, but to love her again. I'm Luna Elowen, and you've just stepped into a softer universe. This is Night Bloom Aliens, a place where forgotten hearts bloom under distant stars, where love stories drift through time, tangled in whispers and moonlight. Tonight's tale will hold you gently until you fall asleep, so close your eyes. Breathe slow and drift with me. And if these whispered journeys touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story waiting just beyond the stars. Tonight's dream begins now. The cottage stood alone at the farthest edge of Wisparlow, half swallowed by a forest older than the town itself. Pale morning mist curled like breath across the damp earth. The birch trees stood still as statues, their bark ghost white under the grey light. Alara Winters paused at the gate, suitcase in hand, coat collar pulled high around her throat. The key felt heavy, colder than metal should be. New beginnings, she whispered, though no one was there to hear it. The house had been empty for decades. That's what the realtor said. But it didn't feel empty. It felt quiet in a way that listens back. She stepped inside. The wooden floor sighed beneath her boots. The air smelled of dried roses, ash, and old secrets. Sunlight struggled through moth-eaten curtains. In the hallway, a large mirror hung, tarnished, cracked near the edges. It didn't reflect light, only stillness. Alara moved upstairs. Every door she opened felt like she was waking something. The master bedroom was large and strangely untouched. An antique bed, a lace coverlet, a grandfather clock in the corner. It was stopped. Midnight. Exactly midnight. She stared at it. Tick, tick. But it didn't move. She sat on the bed, hands resting in her lap. Her breath was slow. Her eyes stung. This was supposed to be her escape, a place to start over, away from the city, away from loss. But Whisper Hollow didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like she'd been here before. That night the wind came with a strange song. It wasn't a howl. It was softer, sadder, like someone humming under their breath. Elara. She sat up in bed. The room was dark but not empty. Moonlight spilled in like silver liquid, touching only the mirror. Fog curled outside the window, thicker than it had been all day. It pressed against the glass like a breath. Then she heard it again. Elara, come. Her heart pounded. Her hand reached for the coat hanging by the door before she even realized she'd stood up. The floorboards creaked with every step. She walked through the hall, past the mirror. There was something behind her in the reflection, but when she turned, the hallway was empty. Outside, the mist hugged the trees. Gold wrapped around her ankles like water, and still the voice called, Elara. She followed it, into the woods, past the thorn line, past where the path should have ended, and then there she was, the bride, standing alone in the clearing. Her gown was torn lace, her veil flowed like smoke. She didn't move, she didn't breathe, but she watched. Elara couldn't run, couldn't scream, couldn't look away. She stepped closer, and just before the bride vanished like fog, a whisper directly behind her ear. You were there the night I died. Elara turned sharply, and from behind the tree line, a pair of glowing eyes watched her. You've seen her now, and she remembers you. Elara awoke with a jolt. The room was darker than it should be. The morning light fought to creep in around the edges of the curtains. She rubbed her eyes and turned toward the antique mirror across from the bed. The glass was fogged. A large handprint, too large to be hers, lingered at the center. Slowly, it began to fade. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked. Was it just condensation? A trick of light? She got up and walked slowly toward it. As she reached out to touch the mirror, a cold breath touched the nape of her neck. He's waiting for you, where time stands still. Elara spun around. No one was there, just the still room, the faint ticking of the old clock that, she realized, wasn't ticking at all. The silence grew heavy, almost physical. She leaned closer to the mirror. This time something was written in the fog. Do not look back. Midnight knows. Her heart thudded. Her hands trembled. She stepped back, staring into her own frightened reflection. Suddenly, a soft knock at the front door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and she didn't see anyone through the peephole, but there, on the ground, was a single white robe. Elara, you've begun to remember. Come find me where the moon never fades, Elara's hands clutched the rose tighter. She whispered to herself, Adrian. But how? She'd only heard that name in her dreams.
Elara sat on the edge of her bed, the white rose resting gently in her lap. She traced the black lace ribbon with her fingertips, eyes flicking to the foggy window. The air outside shimmered with moonlight, as if the night had paused just for her. She turned the card over again. The words hadn't changed. Come find me where the moon never fades. Adrian, she whispered aloud this time. The name tasted like déjà vu, as if she'd spoken it many times before, in dreams. Elara rose and walked to the window. The woods were cloaked in silence. The fog was thicker tonight, but something new caught her eye. A faint golden glow between the trees. She turned back toward her nightstand where the locket lay. She hadn't opened it since she found it beneath the floorboards. Her thumb brushed the clasp. Inside, a photograph. 2 people, a bride and a man. The man's face was clear, his eyes too familiar. Adrian. The bride's face, however, had been scratched out violently. It was never supposed to end like this. Elara's breath caught. The voice hadn't come from outside, it came from the rose. She held it close. Who are you? She asked the night, trembling. I waited under the window where you watched me die. Elara's gaze snapped back to the fog-drenched window. She stepped closer. Her fingertips touched the glass. There, in the garden below, stood a man. Pale, tall, dressed in charcoal grey. His hand rested on the broken gate, his face hidden in shadows, but she knew it was him, Adrian. Their eyes met, though she couldn't see his clearly. Something about the space between them felt like the moment before a kiss, like a held breath. Suddenly the lights flickered, and he was gone. Elara backed away from the window, heart pounding. Then a soft knock, not at the front door, but from inside the mirror. She turned slowly toward it. A white blur moved across the glass and carved into the fog as if written by a finger. You remember now. Follow the rose. She grabbed her coat, clutched the rose, and walked toward the night.
Some memories don't wait to be remembered. They come for you.
The air outside was sharp and thick with moonlight. Elara's boots barely crunched over the damp grass as she stepped toward the old gate, guided only by the rose still clutched in her hand and the faint echo of the knock from the mirror. She paused at the edge of the garden, heart racing. He was there, Adrian, leaning gently against the gate, his form lit silver by the moon. His coat fluttered softly in the breeze. He didn't speak, but his eyes, they pulled at her. Is it really you? She asked, barely louder than breath. He didn't answer. He lifted a hand, palm open, and slowly extended it toward her. Elara's feet moved on their own. The closer she came, the more the world seemed to dissolve. Trees melted into shadow, the wind became silent, time hesitated. She stood inches from him now, and up close she could see it. He looked exactly like the man in the photograph, but younger, or perhaps untouched by time. "I waited," Adrian said finally. His voice was like velvet soaked in sorrow. "I waited where the veil thins, where the living forget." Tears stung Alara's eyes. "Why do I know you?" she asked. He tilted his head gently. "Because your soul remembers what your mind cannot." She reached up, brushing her fingertips across his cheek, cold and yet somehow alive. "What happened to you?" Adrian's eyes darkened. "I died waiting for love and woke up inside a memory." Suddenly, the rose in her hand wilted, the black lace fell away, and behind Adrian the woods groaned with a sound not meant for the living. A figure emerged, the bride, veiled, pale, arms outstretched. She walked straight through Adrian's body. Alara stumbled backward, the cold of her breath catching in the air. Adrian reached for her again, but this time his fingers began to vanish. "You must find the journal, Alara, the one I left for you before everything fell apart." Before she could,
"The past doesn't stay buried, especially when it's written in blood and love." Elara stormed back into the cottage, heart thundering in her chest. The rose had vanished. Adrian had vanished, yet his final words echoed inside her mind like a song stuck between worlds. The journal. She didn't even take off her coat. Her boots left a trail of dirt across the old wooden floors as she dropped to her knees beside the fireplace. The floor creaked under her weight. She pressed her palms flat, knocked softly. There. Her fingers scrambled at the edges of a slightly raised floorboard. With effort, she pried it loose. Dust flew into the air, ancient and dry, and beneath it, wrapped in crumbling lace, was a leather-bound journal, tied with a red velvet ribbon. "You found me." Elara froze. The voice didn't come from behind her, it came from the journal. She untied the ribbon with trembling hands. The pages inside were yellowed, ink faded but still legible. She began to read. "May 3rd, the first time I saw her, she stood beneath the veil tree, hair like dusk, eyes like storms. Her name was Elara, but I never told her mine." Elara gasped. The handwriting. It was Adrian's. "May 6th, the villagers say the bride is cursed, that if she's seen, a love is lost, but But I don't believe in curses. I believe in memory, in second chances. Tears blurred the ink. May 10th. I think she's remembering me in pieces, in dreams. And if she remembers, maybe we won't have to die this time. Elara closed the journal for a moment, clutching it to her chest. So this wasn't just a ghost story. It was their story, and she'd lived it before. Suddenly, turn the page, Elara, she obeyed, and there, scribbled between the lines of an unfinished entry, meet me where the veil was broken under the tree before midnight, or I will fade again. She looked up. Outside, the wind was rising. The moon was nearly full. Some trees remember everything, even the vows never spoken.
Elara clutched the journal to her chest as she stepped into the cold, silver-drenched night. The moon hung low like an eye, watching. The veil tree stood at the edge of the forest, towering, ancient. Its bark looked as though it had been burned and healed again. Thin strips of white cloth hung from its gnarled branches, fluttering in the breeze. Wedding veils. Each one whispered when the wind moved. "Adrian!" Elara called out softly, voice trembling. No answer. She approached the tree, the earth beneath her soft and uneven. Moonlight filtered through the bare branches like lace. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows. Adrian, his face calm, but eyes stormy with emotion. Thoughtful. "I didn't know if you'd remember me," he said. "I don't. Not fully," Elara whispered, "but something in me aches when you're gone." Reassuring. "It's enough." He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver chain. On it, a ring, simple, elegant, burned around the edge as if it had survived fire. Solemn. "I carried this through death, through time," he said, "because I never got to place it on your finger." Elara's breath caught. "You were going to marry me?" He nodded slowly. "Until the veil tore, and we were separated." A breeze kicked up. The veils in the tree twisted violently. One flew loose and landed between them. Elara bent to pick it up. Her fingers touched the lace. And suddenly, the world blurred. The forest disappeared. She stood at an altar. Dozens of faceless guests. A violin playing. Adrian beside her, smiling. Then, screams. Blood. Adrian falling. Elara snapped back into the present, the veil clutched tightly in her hands. Her chest heaved. "I saw it. The wedding. The end." Determined. "We can change it, but only if you remember it all. The truth is deeper than this tree's roots." The veils above them began to burn, one by one, turning into white ash, and from behind the tree, a voice hissed. "You're not supposed to love him again." Elara turned, eyes wide, and there stood Evelyn, but her eyes were not her own.
Not everyone who looks familiar is safe to remember.
Elara stumbled backward, the lace veil slipping from her hands. Evelyn stood just beyond the veil tree's shadow, her dress rustling like dry leaves. But her eyes, they were too wide, too dark, too ancient.
"Elara,"
Evelyn said, smiling. But it wasn't Evelyn's voice. It was layered, multiple tones speaking at once, feminine, masculine, young, and impossibly old.
"What are you
The thing wearing Evelyn's shape tilted its head.
You opened the journal. You followed the rose. Now the forgotten ones are awake.
Adrian stepped forward protectively, placing himself between Alara and the creature. You're not welcome here! The air dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Frost formed at the edges of the tree bark.
I was there,
the creature said.
When the vows were whispered under breath, when the ring fell in blood, I held her soul while it shattered.
Alara grabbed Adrian's hand. Why her? Why Evelyn?
She was your link,
it hissed.
Your anchor to the world you forgot. So I took her, and through her I will end what never should have begun.
Alara's heart pounded. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the journal.
This has your name too.
The creature's smile faltered. She opened to the last page. Words were being written, letter by letter, in fresh ink. She's not Evelyn anymore. Her eyes are the key. Break the gaze, or lose the night. Alara looked up.
I'm not afraid of you,
she said, voice trembling but firm.
Give me back my friend.
The creature let out a sound, half laugh, half sob.
Then look deeper, Alara. Look into her eyes and remember what you buried.
Against Adrian's protest, Alara stepped forward. She met Evelyn's eyes, those dark pools of twisting memory, and she fell in. Not physically, not visibly, but her mind snapped back to a field of lilies, to a shattered wedding, to a child crying in the woods, and to a scream that sounded like her own. Alara collapsed to her knees. Adrian caught her just before she hit the ground.
She's inside her own past,
the creature whispered, and then Evelyn's body dropped limp, empty. The thing was gone. But so was part of Alara.
Some ghosts don't wear white veils. Some wear the face of your forgotten self.
Alara's world spun. She felt her knees hit soft ground, but when she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the forest anymore. She was standing barefoot in a wide field of lilies. The petals glowed under a golden twilight sky, though no sun could be seen. The air smelled of memory, like lavender and ash. Alara looked down at her hands. They were smaller, too small. She touched her face. Her hair was in pigtails. Her voice, when she whispered, was the voice of a child. This is me. From the distance, a girl appeared, around 6 years old, wearing a red ribbon in her hair. Standing still in the middle of the lilies, hands cupped around something invisible. Alara, child Alara, moved toward her. Each step stirred a wind that wasn't blowing. "Hello?" she called. The child didn't answer until Alara was just close enough to hear her whisper, "You left me here." Tears rose in Alara's eyes. "I didn't know. I didn't remember." The child opened her hands. Inside was a tiny porcelain ring box, burned. Alara's heart seized.
"That was the day of the fire,"
she whispered.
"The day I lost him."
The child nodded. Her eyes reflected the flame.
"You ran, you forgot, you buried us. But love doesn't stay buried."
Suddenly, the lilies around them began to wilt, turning black, falling into ash, and the air rippled. A figure stood at the edge of the field. Adrian, but not as he was.
This version wore a blood-stained suit, his face pale, his lips barely moved, yet his voice filled the field.
You made a promise beneath this sky.
Alara dropped to her knees beside the child.
I'm so sorry,
she whispered.
I forgot who I was, who we were.
The girl reached out and placed the scorched ring box in Alara's hand. Then the child disappeared, and the lilies returned, bright, alive. Alara rose, full grown again, back in her own skin. The field shimmered. Adrian smiled faintly.
You found her,
he said.
Now find yourself.
A blinding light engulfed her, and Alara woke, back in the cottage, the ring box in her hand, still warm.
Some promises were never meant to fit the fingers of the living. Alara stared at the ring box in her palm. The scorched velvet surface pulsed with residual warmth. She opened it slowly. Inside, a delicate ring rested against black silk. The band was silver, twisted like vines. The stone in the center flickered with color, sometimes blue, sometimes blood red. Her breath hitched. A voice echoed in my mind. You made a promise beneath this sky. Alara slid the ring onto her finger. It didn't fit, no matter how gently she turned it, pushed it, begged it. Her skin resisted. Suddenly, it wasn't meant for this life. She spun around. Adrian stood in the mirror's reflection, but not in the room. Adrian. He raised his hand against the glass. You must return it, or lose me again. The lights flickered. The room began to breathe, walls pulsing in and out like lungs. Alara backed away, heart pounding. Return it where? The mirror cracked, and one word carved itself in the frost. Chapel. She remembered. The ruined chapel in the woods, the one they used to visit as children, the one with no roof and a single stained glass window still clinging to the frame. That's where the wedding had been planned, and where it ended. She grabbed the journal and the ring box and ran. The forest was wild tonight. Fog clawed at her ankles. Trees whispered her name. Elara, Elara. When she reached the clearing, the chapel stood broken, weeping ivy from its stone bones. She stepped through the archway. Moonlight poured in through the missing roof. The single stained glass window shimmered. She placed the ring box on the altar. The air changed. Adrian appeared, not as a reflection, not as a memory, but fully, truly there. He walked to her. You brought it back. Tears fell from her eyes as he took her hands. This time, he whispered, we finish what we began. The ring rose from the box on its own. It hovered, and then it shattered. Adrian gasped. His image flickered. No, Alara whispered. Not every vow ends at the altar. Some are witnessed by things that never die.
Alara's hands trembled as the shards of the ring scattered across the chapel floor. Each piece shimmered, then melted into the stone as if absorbed by time itself. Adrian stepped back, his form flickering, less solid than before. "It's here," he whispered, eyes wide with fear. "It followed the promise. It remembers the vow." From the shadowed archway of the chapel, a shape emerged, not quite human, not quite shadow. It moved like smoke trapped in flesh, eyes like dying stars, fingers too long, and behind it a wedding veil dragged across the broken floor, smeared in ash. Alara clutched the journal, heart hammering. "What is it?" Adrian didn't look away. "It's the thing that walks between vows, the witness of broken oaths, the keeper of promises made too deeply." The creature's head turned slowly toward her and smiled. "You didn't finish," it said. Its voice was every groom who never said, "I do," every bride who died before the kiss. "You ran before the vow was sealed, so now it belongs to me." Alara felt the journal pulse in her arms. The last page flipped open on its own. To bind love beyond death, one must finish the vow or sever the soul that made it. She looked at Adrian. His image was weakening. "No," she whispered, "I won't let it take you." The creature stepped onto the altar, its body bent at angles that broke sound. Adrian turned to her. "Alara, say it." "Say what?" "Our vow. Finish it." Alara closed her eyes, let the words rise from somewhere older than memory, with conviction. "I loved you before breath, and I will love you beyond silence. In every lifetime I vow to find you, and remember." The moment she spoke the last word, the creature screamed. Adrian shone like a star. The chapel trembled, and the veil turned to ash, but as the light faded, Adrian fell to his knees, fading. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You remembered, but it wasn't enough." Alara rushed to him. "What do I do?" His eyes met hers. "Go to the graveyard," he said. "Dig where the lilies sleep." And then he was gone. Only the vow remained.
Graves aren't always where bodies lie. Sometimes they hold the living pieces of a forgotten soul.
The night was colder now, as if the vow had pulled all warmth from the world. Alara wandered through the forest, the journal clutched to her chest, each step drawing her closer to the graveyard. The path wound like a memory through the trees, worn, silent, sacred. As she passed beneath a dying willow, she saw them, white lilies, dozens of them, glowing faintly in the moonlight like candle flames frozen in bloom. This is the place. She knelt among the flowers. Her fingers touched the earth. Cold, too cold. The ground pulsed. She began to dig. With bare hands, with breath trembling in fog, with tears streaking down her cheeks. After minutes that felt like hours, her hand struck wood, a small ornate box, black, silver trim engraved with lilies and initials E and A. She opened it. Inside, a letter, a pressed lily, and a wedding invitation. But it wasn't dated. It was blank. It was never sent.
The journal in her hand flared open. New words appeared. If it was never sent, it was never real. To make it real, you must bury it again, in your name, alone. Alara froze, but that would mean a voice from behind her, Adrian's. No more shared fate. If you bury it in your name, I'll stay where I belong. She turned. There he stood, pale and warm-eyed, but fading fast. I don't want to let you go. He knelt beside her. And I don't want to be a ghost in your story. Alara touched the letter, kissed it, folded it carefully. She placed it in the box, along with the lily and the invitation. Then she whispered, I bury this vow in my name. Alara Winters, in memory, not in waiting. The lilies around her glowed. A breeze lifted the hair from her face. Adrian smiled and began to fade, but this time he looked at peace.
Some nights refuse to shine because they know what they've lost. The grave sealed behind her. Alara stood in the center of the lily field, her breath clouding in the still, moonless air. Above her, the sky was a velvet void, no stars, no glow, just silence. The moon did not rise. It was as if the world had agreed to mourn. She wrapped her coat tighter around her, the fabric stiff with dew. There was no sound but her heartbeat, no motion but the wind tracing the flowers like invisible fingers. Inside her chest, something ached, more hollow than grief, more final than goodbye. She walked slowly back to the cottage. It too felt different, quieter, still. The mirror was no longer cracked. The journal lay on the table, shut, its cover cold to the touch. She sat by the window and waited. Hours passed. No whispers, no flickering lights, no Adrian. Was it real? She traced the frost on the glass. Her reflection looked older, not in years, but in weight, like someone who had lived through something no one else could name. Then Alara rose slowly, hesitant. She opened it. No one, but at her feet, a letter, sealed with black wax, pressed with a symbol she remembered, a ring broken in two. She took it inside, hands shaking, opened it. Inside was a single line. If love survives death, where does it sleep? No signature. Alara closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks she smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because some part of him still lingered. Not in the veil, not in the journal, not in the lilies, but in her, and outside, though the moon did not rise, the lilies began to bloom. Not all letters are meant to be answered. Some are meant to be remembered. Alara sat at the edge of her bed, the letter resting beside her like a sleeping survives death? Where does it sleep? Outside, the night still refused a moon. The lilies swayed beneath invisible currents. But the air no longer carried fear, only memory. She picked up the envelope again. There was nothing on the back, no name, no return address, just the wax seal, broken now. She turned to the journal, opened it. Nothing new appeared, but something shifted behind her. A soft creak. She looked up. The mirror, no longer cracked, was fogged. Words began to form. Look in the box beneath the stairs. What box? Elara rose and moved slowly to the stairwell. Cobwebs danced in the corners. She'd never searched this part of the cottage. Her fingers skimmed the baseboards, and then a panel gave way. Behind it, a small dust-covered tin box. She brought it into the light, opened it. Inside, an old key, a black and white photo of Adrian as a child, and a second letter. She unfolded it. You must come to Thornhill House. The attic window still remembers you. Her breath caught. Thornhill House, Adrian's family home, abandoned for years after the fire, rumoured to be cursed. She clutched the photo. In it, a young Adrian stood beside a girl. That girl was her. I knew you even then. She folded the letter, looked outside. The path to Thornhill House was steep, forested and wild, but her footsteps already knew the way. And in the distance, just for a second, a single attic window. Some houses don't fall to fire. They fall to memory. The wind howled as Elara stepped off the path and into the overgrown yard of Thornhill House. The gate, half hanging from rusted hinges, let out a long groan as she pushed it open. Vines clung to the stone walls, swallowing windows like nature trying to forget something man once built. Thornhill stood crooked, wounded, but not dead. Elara clutched the old key tighter. Why did you bring me here? She whispered. The house didn't answer. But the attic window, just as the letter promised, flickered. Once, then still. She stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath her boots. The key slid into the lock and turned without resistance. Inside, the air was thick with soot and silence. Old furniture sat like forgotten ghosts. Ash coated everything, and in the middle of the jarred floor, a single footprint, bare, fresh. Elara followed it up the staircase. Each step groaned as if remembering pain. At the top, the attic door waited. Her hand trembled on the knob. She opened it slowly. The room was lit by moonlight pouring through the stained attic window. Though outside there was still no moon. In the center of the room, a cradle, old, empty, rocking gently. Beside it, a burned wedding dress and a painting. Elara stepped closer. The painting showed a bride. Her face was Elara's, and the groom, Adrian. But behind them, in the shadows of the painting, was the creature, watching.
Eyes that never close, never forget. And neither does the heart beneath them. Elara stood frozen. The bride in the veil was inches from her face, yet her presence felt miles away. Her veil fluttered in wind that didn't exist, and her lips never moved when she whispered, "You wore my name. You whispered my vow. Now you must see what I saw." The attic room melted away like wet paint. Suddenly, Elara was somewhere else, a church, ancient, candles lit every pew. White lilies adorned the altar, but the guests, dozens of them, had no faces, just hollow eyes staring forward. At the center stood the bride, her, but not her. She was in a gown of shadow and lace, the veil stitched with words too faded to read. A man stood before her, Adrian. His hands trembled as he held a ring, but just before he could place it, the doors burst open and the creature entered. Screaming, fire, Adrian fell. The bride turned and looked straight into Elara's eyes across time. "You didn't run. I did." Suddenly, Elara was back in the attic. The bride stood before her, veil lifting slowly, underneath Elara's own face. "You were me. I was the part you buried to survive." Elara staggered back. "Why come now?" "Because love isn't just light. It's memory, pain, flame, and you were about to forget again." the mirror behind them cracked. Adrian appeared, reaching through it. But this time, the bride did too, and she placed her hand on his heart. Adrian exhaled. "I'm ready to finish it." Ilara stepped forward, hand on the mirror. Their fingers touched, and the veil dissolved between them.
Some vows aren't spoken in churches or carved on rings. They live in glass, in memory, in breath.
Ilara stood before the cracked mirror, Adrian on one side, the bride, her forgotten self, on the other. They all stared into each other, through time, through pain. "Are you sure?" Ilara whispered. Adrian nodded, his eyes gentle. "This is the only way for both of us to be free." The bride raised her veil, revealing a face filled with sorrow and love. To reclaim what we lost, we must finish what we began. The mirror shimmered, reflections fell away. Only the three of them remained in a space beyond time. A chapel not made of stone, but of light. A sky not made of stars, but of memory. And before them, an altar. Adrian took Ilara's hand. The bride stood beside them, watching. Ilara's heart beat like a prayer. Adrian spoke. "I vow to remember you, even when the world forgets us. I vow to love the soul behind every lifetime, every face." Ilara swallowed, her voice trembling. "I vow to find you, in shadow or light, in sorrow or joy, and to never run again." The air pulsed. The veil floated into the air, wrapped around their joined hands. The mirror behind them began to mend, piece by piece. As the final shard clicked into place, the chapel faded, the vow was sealed. They stood once more in the attic, but this time, Adrian was real, solid, warm, and the bride, she stepped back into the mirror, smiling. "Live for both of us." Then vanished into the silver. The attic fell silent, but not empty. Ilara turned to Adrian, tears streaming. He cupped her face. "I remembered you," he said, and she kissed him like a promise.
Not every love ends in I too. Some begin after the veil has fallen. Ilara and Adrian sat at the edge of the attic floor, legs dangling over scorched beams and forgotten time. For a moment, neither spoke. It was the kind of silence that didn't ache anymore. It hummed with something new. Peace. Adrian reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You still smell like lilies," he said. She laughed. "You still look like a ghost." He leaned closer, intimately. "And you still shyly. The sun was rising outside, the first real light in days. Its golden rays spilled across the wood like a blessing, but the moment fractured when the journal fluttered open beside them. Pages turned, a sketch appeared, one Alara didn't remember drawing, a chapel, but this time complete, whole, unburned, and beside it a note thoughtfully, the wedding that never was still waits. Adrian looked at her gently. Do you want to? Alara nodded. They stood hand in hand and walked down from the attic into the world that had once buried them in silence. They returned to the ruins of the old chapel where the lilies now bloomed brighter than before. Nora Whitlock stood waiting. She smiled with knowing eyes. Amused, took you both long enough. From behind her, Evelyn stepped forward, alive, whole. You're okay, Alara whispered. Evelyn hugged her tight, emotional. You brought us back. There was no priest, no crowd, no music, just lilies, light, and love. Adrian pulled a ring from his pocket, the same one that had once shattered, but now it fit. He slid it onto Alara's finger resolutely. I do. And she whispered the words that ended every haunting. Deeply, I always have. Even after vows are spoken, some reflections still mourn. That night, after the sun had set and the last lily folded into sleep, Ilara returned to the cottage with Adrian beside her. The stars blinked quietly in the sky. The moon had finally risen again, full, round, gentle. But when she entered the cottage, something felt off. The mirror, the same mirror that once cracked with whispers, now stood clean, whole, and shimmering. Yet as Ilara passed it, her reflection didn't follow. She froze. Adrian noticed. What is it? She pointed. Look. He stepped beside her. Two bodies in the room, only one in the glass. Ilara moved her hand. No response. Adrian touched the surface. It rippled. One must always stay to keep the door open. Ilara's heart sank. No, she whispered. We finished the vow. We're free. The reflection moved on its own, not a mimic,
not her. The bride stared back, but she was no longer a ghost. She was becoming her own self. You walked into life. I remained in memory. We both chose. Tears welled up in Ilara's eyes. I don't want to forget you. The bride smiled. Then remember me not as sorrow, but as the proof that love survived. The mirror began to dim. The glass folded into shadow, and the last image Ilara saw was the bride stepping into water, awake behind her, still, quiet. Adrian wrapped his arms around Ilara as the mirror turned to silver again. No voice, no echo, just stillness. They stood in silence.
Some dreams don't vanish with waking. They wait behind closed eyes. That night, Ilara and Adrian lay beneath the old quilt, the cottage warm, the world outside wrapped in a velvet hush. Ilara's head rested on his chest. His heart beat a steady lullaby, but she didn't sleep, because when she closed her eyes, the dream came. Not a nightmare, not the usual whispering fog or the veil floating in darkness. This was different. A meadow, endless, blue with moonflowers, and at its center, a table set for two. Ilara walked barefoot toward it, her gown trailing petals in its wake. Someone sat at the table, not Adrian. The child from the lily field. He smiled. You found your way back to love. Now find your way back to yourself. She sat across from him. The meadow hummed with a hush of old lullabies. Ilara blinked. The child was gone. In his place, a mirror. Inside it, a door. She stepped through, and on the other side, every moment she'd forgotten. Running through a garden with Adrian as children. The first lullaby, the promise she made to herself the night before the accident. She wept, not from sorrow, but from becoming whole. She turned. Adrian waited at the garden gate, holding a moonflower in one hand, the locket in the other. Come home, Elara. When a house remembers, it sings. It was nearly dusk when Elara stood again in the center of the old cottage. The mirror had grown quiet, the veil dissolved, the memories softened, but the floor beneath her feet still held something alive. Adrian watched from the doorway. You keep standing there like it's breathing. Softrical, whimsical. Maybe it is, Elara replied, eyes fixed on a single loose board in the corner. She knelt, hands brushing dust aside, heart thudding with a strange anticipation. The lullaby drifted again, barely audible, like a hum pressed between the wood grain. She pressed her ear to the floor. Sush now, sleep, beneath the moon. I heard this when I was a girl, she whispered. She pried up the floorboard. Beneath it, a small tin box, rusted shut, wrapped in silk, and scented faintly of lavender. Elara opened it slowly. Inside, a folded page from a music book, a lock of red hair, a ring that didn't belong to her, and a letter written in handwriting she recognized, her mother's. Elara read it aloud, voice trembling. To my daughter, Elara, if you're reading this, then you've found the place where memory sleeps. You were always meant to return here, to find him, to finish the lullaby I could never sing. Love doesn't die, it waits, in walls, in mirrors, beneath floorboards. Adrian knelt beside her, placing a hand on her back. You never told me she wrote music, he said. I didn't know, Elara whispered, but she left it for me, for us. She unfolded the music page. The notes shimmered faintly, like candlelight on paper. She began to hum. Adrian joined in. Some sounds aren't heard with ears. They're remembered with the soul. Elara stood by the kitchen window, bathed in the hush of early twilight. Outside, the garden looked still, too still. Not even the wind dared stir the flowers tonight. She held the cracked journal in one hand and a cup of cold tea in the other. Adrian was upstairs, asleep for the first time in days. Peaceful, but not untouched. Even in his dreams, he whispered her name. She froze. A delicate sound rang out from the garden. It was a bell, but not any she knew. She stepped onto the porch, each footstep careful. The chill in the air didn't match the summer season. Something old was waking. In the garden, a path had formed. Lilies bowed slightly, forming an aisle. And at the far end, hanging from a thin, rusted arch wrapped in ivy, a small silver bell. That wasn't there before. She approached it slowly. The bell moved gently on its own, without wind. Its chime wasn't loud, just insistent, a calling. Etched into its side was a symbol, a circle broken once, then mended, the same as Adrian's ring. She reached out and touched it, and the world fell silent. Elara blinked, and she was no longer alone. The garden had changed. It was the same space, but now covered in mist. The colors were faded, like money left out in the sun, and seated on the bench by the ivy wall was the bride. Not ghostly, not terrifying, just sorrowful. Her veil lifted slightly in the soft air. Her eyes were Elara's. You came. Elara stepped forward. Why call me now? I thought we finished the vow. The bride looked down at her hands. In them, she held a wilted bouquet, black roses and white lilies. You remembered him. You broke the curse. But love never truly ends. It just changes. I'm not here to haunt you, she continued. I'm here to warn you. Warn me? The bride looked up, and her eyes weren't hers anymore. They were Evelyn's, then Nora's, then Adrian's, flickering like memories being overwritten. Something else followed your vow, something that feeds on endings. You must finish what was started in the garden, the bride said. Not the vow, but the bell. Elara looked back at it, now glowing faintly. What does it mean? The bride stood, stepped closer. Ring it 3 times under a moonless sky, and you'll see what memory buried deepest. And if I don't? The bride began to fade, veil dissolving into mist. Then the ending you chose won't hold. Elara woke on the porch. The bell hung quiet, still real, still waiting. Not all rings are for fingers. Some are circles of fate, love, and what you can never undo. The sky had gone dark again, not with night, but with something heavier. Elara stood in the middle of the chapel ruins, breathless and cold. The A small velvet box appeared on the cracked stone. Black ribbon, silver embroidery. She stepped toward it slowly. Inside, 3 rings, each rested in its own groove, each glowing faintly with a different hue. One blue like memory, one red like blood, one white like moonlight. They weren't meant to be worn, whispered Ilara. Their choices. A page in the journal turned on its own. Words emerged as if written by breath. The ring of what was will show you the truth of your first life. The ring of what is will anchor you to the ghost you love. The ring of what must be will sever the thread between your souls. Alara's hands trembled. I only get to choose one. From behind the altar, a voice answered, choose wisely. Some truths set you free. Others trap you in love forever. She turned. Adrian stood there, not ghostly, not whole, something in between. You're fading. He nodded. Each time, but love never truly ends. It just changes. I'm not here to haunt you, she continued. I'm here to warn you. Warn me? The bride looked up, and her eyes weren't hers anymore. They were Evelyn's, then Nora's, then Adrian's, flickering like memories being overwritten. Something else followed your vow, something that feeds on endings. You must finish what was started in the garden, the bride said. Not the vow, but the bell. Alara looked back at it, now glowing faintly. What does it mean? The bride stood, stepped closer. Ring it 3 times under a moonless sky, and you'll see what memory buried deepest. And if I don't? The bride began to fade, veil dissolving into mist. Then the ending you chose won't hold. Alara woke. On the porch, the bell hung quiet, still real, still waiting. Some endings are not endings at all. Just doorways with hearts left ajar. Alara followed the glow, through the chapel's broken arch, down the overgrown path, past the willow trees
that had grown around their memories. In her hand, the final ring pulsed with soft white light. The ring of what must be. She entered the lantern garden, a hidden grove behind the manor, untouched for decades. But tonight, it was alive. Lanterns floated in the air like fireflies, each one holding a flicker of something lost. A tear, a kiss, a name whispered once, and never again. Adrian waited in the center, not as a ghost, not as a man, but as a soul caught in between. His form shimmered like moonlight on water, real only when you weren't looking directly at him. Alara stepped toward him, resigned. "This is the only way, isn't it?" Adrian nodded slowly, thoughtful. "The vow bound us in love, but love cannot live where time doesn't." A single lantern drifted between them, inside a memory. Their first kiss in the bell tower, beneath the chime that cracked the curse. Alara's voice trembled. Sadly, "If I do this, I lose you." Adrian smiled, gently, comforting. "You never lose what's part of you. You just stop holding it with both hands." The white ring lifted from her palm, floating between them, and then the bride appeared, not veiled, not crying. She looked at peace, peacefully. "Your story rewrote mine," she said softly. "You ended what I could not. You remembered with love, not fear. You chose the truth over comfort." She looked at Adrian, gently. "And now, she can choose to set you free." The wind quieted, the lanterns stilled, and Alara stepped forward. She placed the ring between her lips and whispered her final vow. Solemnly, "I loved you in life. I held you in death. And now I let you go into whatever waits beyond the veil." The lantern holding their kiss flared once, then shattered into light. Adrian smiled, not sadly, not regretfully. "The wind was gentle that morning, yet carried the weight of something ancient, like a whisper echoing from the past. Leaves swirled across the worn stones of the garden path, brushing against Rosa's bare feet as she stepped quietly into the lantern garden, where the night before she and Rayan had made their final vow. But the garden felt different now. Rosa approached the old stone bench where Rayan had promised to wait for her. The lanterns from the night before had all gone out. Their melted wax lay scattered like remnants of dreams that burned too fast. Her eyes searched, heart tight, and then a letter, folded carefully, held down by a small obsidian pendant, the same one Rayan always wore around his neck. Her breath caught as she reached for it, her fingertips trembling. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze, as if resisting, as if it knew the moment it was read, something sacred would end.
She unfolded it slowly. My dearest Rosa, if you are reading this, it means I've gone where words can no longer follow, but where love still reaches. You know me well enough to understand I never believed in fate. I believed in choice, and choosing you every moment, every second, was the greatest act of freedom I ever tasted. But sometimes, even the strongest love must stand still while time moves on. Regretfully, last night in the garden, I saw a future in your eyes I was never meant to hold. I felt it, this haunting feeling that our promise was eternal, but my presence wasn't. Sadly, there's a truth I never spoke, because I wanted just one night of dreams with you, unspoiled by what the world demanded from us. Sincerely, you saved me, Rosa. Grateful, not just from the shadows I carried, but from myself. You reminded me of joy, of sunlight, of the parts of me I thought were already dead. Longing. If I could have stayed, I would have built you 1,000 lanterns, one for each smile you gave me, and one more for every time you forgave the silence I could not explain. Resigned, but I had to go.
She pressed the letter to her heart, then looked up at the sky. Clouds drifted lazily, uncaring, but somewhere in that wind, she thought she heard a voice. "Stay brave, Rosa." And so she did. She stood. She walked. And as the letter slipped from her hand, the wind picked it up, carrying it over the garden wall. Where it flew, soft and unseen, into the world that still needed her.
The days passed slowly, but Rosa no longer counted them in hours or minutes. She counted them in the quiet blooms of the lantern garden, each rose a soft echo of his voice, each breeze a memory brushing gently against her skin. The world still spun, of course. People moved on, cities breathed and blinked, but Rosa stayed close to the soil, to the scent of ash and wax, to the bench where once two hearts had vowed in silence. But grief does not only take, it teaches, and Rosa was learning. She had not read Ryan's letter again, but every word lived inside her now, stitched gently into her steps, her breath, her prayers. It was on the 49th evening since that farewell that something changed. The roses, planted long ago in the farthest corner of the garden, the ones that had never bloomed in years, had opened, not in red or pink, but in a deep midnight blue, and etched into the stone behind them were words she had never noticed before. There is barred, dusk blue, where love chooses to stay, time dares not wilt it. Rosa sank to her knees before them, eyes wide with wonder. The petals felt like velvet stars, soft and eternal. It was then she understood. Ryan hadn't simply left. He had rooted himself here, in this garden, in this moment, had spoken of his love for forgotten things, ancient music, broken statues, dying languages. He had loved what the world abandoned, not because he was sad, but because he believed nothing truly died if someone remembered it. And now Rosa remembered him. With every breath, with every step, she began to rebuild the garden, not in mourning, but in promise. Children came to learn about the rare roses. Travelers whispered stories of the lanterns that glowed, even without flames. And every evening, just before the sun disappeared, Rosa would light a single lantern beneath the oldest tree, not because she hoped he would return, but because she knew he had never left. One night, a little girl tugged at her sleeve and asked, curious, "Miss Rosa, how come these roses never die?" Rosa smiled softly, brushing the girl's hair aside, because, tenderly, she whispered, her eyes on the midnight blooms. They were planted by someone who loved too deeply to let go, and under the stars, the wind had shifted again, not in sorrow this time, but in quiet curiosity. It was the eve of the Lantern Bloom Festival, the first one Rosa had organized since Rayon's letter disappeared into the sky. The garden was alive with soft lights and laughter, footsteps brushing over the stone paths like poetry in motion. Yet, even amidst the warmth, Rosa kept glancing toward the ancient oak at the center, the one where she lit a single lantern every evening for him. But tonight was different. As twilight kissed the garden in gold and violet hues, Rosa brought out a lantern unlike the others. It was shaped like a star, its edges lined with silver leaf, its glass etched with tiny symbols that shimmered when touched by moonlight. She had found it weeks ago, buried in a wooden box beneath the rose bed where the midnight blooms had blossomed. It didn't belong to any recent age. Its hinges were rusted with time, but the star's frame pulsed faintly with warmth, as if holding a memory not quite finished. There was a note inside the box, too, fragile as dried petals. This lantern holds one forgotten wish. Speak it only when the wind is listening. No name, no date, just that. And tonight, Rosa decided she would speak. As the garden dimmed into hush, she stepped beneath the old oak, star lantern in hand. Children gathered around her, quiet with wonder. Even the trees seemed to listen. She lifted the lantern gently, eyes closed, breath steady. "I wish," she whispered into the wind, "for the memory of love to become light for someone who feels lost tonight." The lantern flickered, once, then twice, then bloomed into a glow not of fire, but of stars, actual stars. Tiny specks of stardust began to rise from the lantern's frame, circling upward, dancing between the branches, like they had been waiting for this exact moment for centuries. Gasps filled the garden. Some cried, others simply smiled. But Rosa watched in silence, tears resting on her lashes, not of grief, but awe. The stardust didn't disappear. Instead, it drifted outward, floating across the lanterns lining the paths. Each one, touched by the light, glowed a little brighter. The garden had become a constellation of all the love that had ever passed through it, rayons included. And when Rosa looked up again, she saw him. Not standing, not in flesh, but in a ship. It began with whispers soft as silk, threading through the trees, calling her name in a voice that didn't belong to the present, but to something older, something eternal. Rosa. She paused beneath the twilight-washed archway of the lantern garden, her hand still holding the last flame from the star lantern night. The wind brushed past her, not cold, not warm, just aware. It swirled gently around her fingertips, as though pulling her forward. The others didn't hear it. The garden staff continued hanging lanterns and tying wishes to the prayer branches. But Rosa, she heard her name spoken not once, but again and again, always in a different tone, sometimes like laughter, sometimes like a sigh. She followed it down the jasmine path, through the willow lane, past the sleeping koi pond, and there, hidden behind the bamboo veil, she discovered a clearing she had never seen before. It felt untouched by time, where petals floated endlessly in midair, and the light shimmered like memory. At the center stood an old stone, tall, weather-worn, but still dignified. Across its surface, vines had wrapped themselves, blooming only at the edges, and on its face, her name, Rosa Elaine, carved not with tools, but with wind. Each letter shimmered faintly, not etched, but sung into the stone by countless breezes over the years. The strokes were soft, like calligraphy whispered into existence. She stepped, and as the petals fell gently around her, she knew love, when spoken to the letters and whispered wishes, now hung dim and still, cloaked in frost like sleeping memories. The koi pond had hardened into a glossy mirror, reflecting bare branches above, and the wind, once playful, once full of Rayan's echoes, now moved like a slow breath between worlds, quiet but listening. But the garden did not forget. It waited through amber autumns and bone-white winters. It remembered footprints on the moss, soft laughter under glowing lanterns, and two hearts that once wandered its winding paths, Rosa and Rayan, light and echo. It remembered a girl who danced beneath falling petals, and a boy who made even silence feel alive. And now, as the world thawed slowly into spring, the garden stirred. Rosa returned, her fingers gloved, her breath rising in clouds, but her eyes still holding the same fire as when she last stood there. She carried no lantern this time, no letter, only a seed cupped in her palms, a single blossom from the star lantern tree, preserved all winter in a velvet pouch, a gift from the wind, a gift from memory. She found the old spot again, the hidden clearing behind the bamboo veil. The old clock tower at the edge of town hadn't chimed in years. Its brass gears lay dormant, and ivy had curled like quiet veins across the cracked stone. Townsfolk said time had simply stopped caring about that corner of the world, but Rosa knew better. She climbed the winding stairs of the tower that evening, a lantern in hand and a parchment in her pocket. Rayan's final sketch, the one he left folded beneath the garden bench, caught in a gust, almost lost to time. It wasn't a letter, it was a blueprint of this clock. Clocks don't keep time, they keep promises. And so she came, before the dusk swallowed the sky, to keep his, the interior of the tower, smelled of rust, dust, and something older, memories sealed into wood. Rosa moved past the skeletal gears, the winding ropes, the frozen pendulum, until she reached the heart of it, a small brass dial etched with initials R.R., Rayon's last work. He had been restoring this clock in secret, not just for the town, but for her. When I fix this, I'll make it chime only for you, every dusk, a reminder that no matter how far the world turns, I'll find my way back. The blueprint bore his notes, corrections, even smudges where his fingers must have hesitated, as if he knew he wouldn't get to finish it himself. But Rosa would. She spent hours inside the skeleton of the clock, oiling the gears with care, replacing bent teeth with ones she forged in her father's old workshop. She whispered to it like a friend, as Rayon once had, naming every gear, calling each tick back to life. And as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in warm tangerine and violet, she tightened the final bolt. The tower shuddered a breath. Then, click, the pendulum swung, the hands moved, and then the chime, a deep, sonorous bell, rang through the valley. 1, then 2, then 3, echoing through the air like a vow made from time itself. People paused in their homes. Lantern. The festival was quiet this year. No parades, no music, just lanterns, hundreds of them, gently swaying in the evening air like breath held in reverence. Rosa stood at Baal's crest, overlooking the garden of echoes, where everything had once begun. Tonight, she had not come with wishes. She had come with remembrance. In her hands, she held the last lantern, handmade, painted with gold ink and stars. Inside it, a folded note, blank, because some promises are too sacred for words. Below her, the garden shimmered, lanterns lining the koi pond, dangling from bamboo stalks, tucked in trees that had weathered storms. The star lantern tree stood tallest now, its bloom glowing with a soft, silver flame, as if time had passed in cycles only it understood. This was the place where lanterns came to sleep, not die, not disappear. Sleep until someone, somewhere, needed them again. Rosa knelt, touching the grass where Rayon had once drawn constellations with his fingertips, connecting stars that didn't yet exist. The air here felt layered with memory. His laughter, her letters, the wind that once carried names across seasons. As twilight melted into deep night, she lit the final lantern, not to send it away, but to place it in the heart of the garden under the star lantern tree. And when she did, the petals above stirred. The lanterns across the garden flickered once, twice, and then a soft, inexplicable shimmer fell over everything, like moonlight woven with memory. And suddenly, the stars, they weren't just above, they were within, each lantern glowing like a tiny universe. The garden became a sky flipped upside down, constellations in the grass, galaxies in the trees, comets in the koi pond's reflection. And Rosa, standing at the center, was both a garden where memories grew like lanterns, a love that time could not untangle, and a name the wind never stopped whispering. Even now, if you walk gently through that garden, if you listen not just with your ears but with your heart, you might still hear her laugh in the petals, still feel his promise in the breeze, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find your own letter waiting